Welcome to the Voice for Mount Pleasant podcast, featuring discussions and interviews about the people, places, and events that make Mount Pleasant such a special place.
Hello, this is Roger Gaither, your host for the Voice for Mount Pleasant podcast. In this episode, Bill Macchio, the publisher of Mount Pleasant Magazine, talks with Live 5 Chief Meteorologist Bill Walsh about Hurricane Hugo. And now, here are Bill and Bill.
Here we are today on Voice for Mount Pleasant, and I've got to tell everybody I'm so excited to have my friend Bill Walsh with me as we speak to the upcoming September. The end of September was a big month for us, wasn't it, Bill?
It really was, especially over the years. Weather-wise, of course, it's been a big couple of months. But, September, October, usually busy months in the hurricane business, as it has been the last few years, and certainly going way back, even back past Hurricane Hugo.
So before, we really get started, Bill, I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time and getting with my photographer, Julie, to do the front cover of the magazine that they see up there now. That's a great plane. It was a great shot. And, over the years, being in the reserves has been a big part of your life, has it not?
It is, and thanks for having us on the magazine. That was a lot of fun, and Bill Farley did a fabulous job. And I got to say, it was, and it still is, as a matter of fact. Even though I've retired recently, but 23 years doing military, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It was it's interesting having two jobs, a civilian job and a military job, because you're doing both. So you go from one world to the other world pretty rapidly, and but it has been a great honor and a pleasure, and I've just had a blast, and I still help, of course, with a lot of my folks in the reserves, and still consult on some projects and stuff like that.
Well, here's some photographs up there so everybody can see them, but that article was great. Bill, you look really young there, dude.
See, my hair was different. Look, my hair.
Yeah. Listen, I know you and Mrs. W, the awesome Janet Walsh, has a four-legged family friend, and I wanted people to get to know you a little bit more. And so tell us about Ruby, and have you always been into Basset Hounds?
Well, we had years ago back, when I first started at Channel 4 back in the 80s, we had two Basset Hounds actually, and they got older and passed on, but that was a long time ago. And then this last Christmas, I get I was actually working Christmas Eve. I'm doing the broadcast, and all of a sudden, my kids walk in. I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing here? I'm thinking, what's going on? They said, well, we have something for you. And then they said, close your eyes. And then Janet comes walking in with Ruby in her arms, plops Ruby down in my arms, and says, Merry Christmas. We have a new Basset Hound. So I've always been a big fan of Basset Hounds. My neighbor, when I was a kid, had one called Buford the Basset Hound. And Buford was even caught in a fire once, and they gave Buford mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And the dog was fine. But I've always had a special place for Basset Hounds. So, yes, Ruby is a Basset Hound, a little tiny one. Well, she's now 11 months old. So, but yeah, she's really, she joins Annie in our family as the second dog. Annie is a Norwegian elk hound. And you have a couple of dogs, don't you?
I do have a couple of dogs. I want to go into your passion, if I may, for what you do. I have a great passion for publishing magazines. That's my craft. Well, you have the same kind of passion for your craft, which is, reporting the weather and stuff. But where did it come from, dude? Like why do you have such great passion for that?
I must have had something to drink when I was little or something. I don't know, Bill. And just as you do for the magazine business, and we're both very similar as far as that goes. In a magazine type of thing, broadcasting, we're in the public eye business. And, when I was a kid, I used to watch on television. We had a big blizzard when I was in high school. It was a blizzard of 78, and we had 52 inches of snow.
And where was this, Bill? Bill, where was this? Tell everybody where it was.
Oh, it was in New England. I was in Rhode Island. I grew up in the smallest state in the Union. The state of Rhode Island, smaller than the county of Charleston. But we had a big blizzard, 78, and we were out of school for like 2 weeks, and you couldn't move if there were cars stuck on the highways. That was a real kickoff to my fascination with weather. And I used to watch the weatherman, the local weatherman. There was two. There was Harvey Leonard. There was John Giorgi. These are back in Providence, Rhode Island. So I watched these guys and growing up, and I thought, God, I love that. But I was also big into aviation, airplanes. I love flying.
Okay.
So those two things I kind of put together. It's like, I like And I like show business. I mean, I like, radio, stuff like that. And one of my best friends was my sister's boyfriend, and he was going to be a news anchor. He wanted to be in news. And he was a few years older than me. I was a freshman in high school. He was a senior. Bottom line is I ended up thinking, the weather and broadcasting together is perfect for me. So I just started looking into it, and I got a passion for it probably in high school. And then even before that, probably growing up. And when you grow up in New England with the snow climate, it gets pretty crazy.
Hey, you're right. I think the aircraft aviation does have a lot to do with, or it intertwines with each other, doesn't it? Let's move on, if you don't mind, to, for all of us here in the low country, September 21st is a big deal to us. To be exact, September 21st, 1989. That's
Yes.
a special date. Before it actually, give us a timeline, if you don't mind, of what you did leading up to the actual hurricane striking the coast.
Hurricane Hugo became a tropical system. It became a depression on the 11th of September, 1989. Ironically, on that same day, I was speaking to a senior citizens group at Stella Maris Church down there on Solomon's Island. And it was in their old, I guess, it was not in the church. It was in their, their outbuilding, or, one of their conference buildings, and it was an older building, I think, if I remember correctly. And I remember looking at the data earlier that day and saying, this is going to be, it looks like this was going to become a hurricane and head toward the islands. And I remember standing there talking to those people and briefing them and saying, yeah, it looks like there's a hurricane out there, or there's a storm that's going to become a hurricane. And that was on the 11th of September. And as the storm grew, became a Category 2 hurricane, 3 hurricane. It went toward Puerto Rico, struck the islands, in particular Puerto Rico, did a lot of damage there. And then, at the time, Bill, we didn't have the extended forecast that we have now.
Right.
We only had a 3-day forecast from the Hurricane Center. We have a 5-day forecast now, but our modeling now goes way out, 240 hours. So what we had then was just a 3-day forecast, and we kept watching, and then of course we had our computer models, and we were looking at that further out. So, around the, September, probably 13, 14, 15, started really watching this thing. And when it moved off Puerto Rico, it started, it had been disrupted by the circulation there in Hispaniola, but in particular Puerto Rico. I think it had 105 mile an hour winds at that point. But we looked at, the trajectory of the storm, and there was not a chance it was going to turn north because of a big blocking high. And I remember in fact, I remember going to Bilo, the old Bilo on Savannah Highway down there where is now it's Palmetto Ford. Anyway, I was down there, and I bought a bunch of water, and somebody recognized it. They said, aren't you on TV? Yeah. Buying a bunch of water? What's going on? I'm like, hey, but I remember getting some supplies that day because looking at the situation and going on TV and saying, you know what, this thing's going to come someplace in the Southeast. And at the time we were looking, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. It didn't look like it was going to go in the Gulf. So, anyway, so as we got closer and the threat got bigger, obviously, there's a threat level. You start moving up. As the threat becomes imminent, then obviously you're into hurricane watches and warnings and whatnot. But Channel 4 at the time, where I was, they were on the, right there next to the Ben Sawyer Bridge, the old building. And, we had to evacuate that building as the storm was approaching. We had to leave because we were going to have 6-7 feet of water in the building. And as the storm approached, we were broadcasting, we were on the air, we were, pretty much 24/7. And then we had to evacuate the storm the afternoon the storm was approaching. We had to evacuate that evening to get out of that building because of the threat to life.
Bill, did you move the broadcast to another location?
We did. Dean Swanson was the anchor. He went over to when we had a team over at the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, which was on Leeds Avenue, the old election headquarters. So he went over there, was set up, and he was we were going back and forth. And at a certain point, he took over I tossed to him. Then I left that building and went out to Leeds Avenue, and then continued the broadcast there. So at one point later in that day, I abandoned. I was the last to leave the building, one of the last to leave the building, went out to Leeds Avenue where all the media was. I mean, Debbie Chard was there. I mean, we had Michael Deep, remember, from the radio. We had, all everybody was there. Channel 2 folks.
You guys were on a safe place. That's why you were
We were in a safer place there. I think Rob was over at the Weather Service. And so there was a ton of media there. And so we broadcast there until they got blown off the air.
So let me ask you, one of the questions I had was the longest stretch of time you were awake during Hurricane Hugo broadcasting. How long was that stretch?
Man, I got to tell you, Bill, I probably a couple of days. I mean, at one point we were NBC. Remember, Channel 2 was ABC at the time.
Right.
So we were NBC at the time, and the Today Show sent somebody to follow me in particular. And this guy, what was his name? Oh gosh, he was a reporter, and he ended up coming and just like staying with me for the last 2 to 2.5 days of the storm as it approached. They were just documenting for the show and following what, because this was the first major hurricane strike in years. I mean, major Category 4 hurricane strike.
For decades,
and,
right?
Yeah, and anyway, so we were up for. I don't think I went to sleep until I finally fell asleep after probably a couple of days being awake at about 5 o'clock in the morning after the storm had just pulled away.
Was Hugo the biggest storm after Camille? Can you recall?
I'd have to go back and look. It was certainly the worst U.S. strike probably after Camille. I mean, we had some other strikes, but it was at the time a $5 billion strike, and that was in 1980s money. So at the time it was the storm of record at the time for sure. And I still have my magazine.
Well, that's what I wanted. You've got some questions.
I love my magazine.
You have some questions you wanted to ask me real quick?
I did.
You have some questions? Okay.
This was the first magazine that I think was done on the storm. This was your creation.
Yeah.
Why did you want to publish something like that? I mean, I think it was fantastic. And this, by the way, is my original copy, and it's
wow.
But I keep it.
People still keep it around, Bill. I feel blessed that people keep it around.
I used to bring it to schools, but what made you publish?
Because when we finally got back into town, my little office over there on Chuck Dolly Boulevard, that's when the old East Cooper Hospital was there. And so we were on the same for electricity and water and things like that. So we had everything there. So people were coming into my office, Bill, telling these stories. And as people would come in and tell their stories, I thought, it'd be great to document that. People would love to hear about what everybody else has gone through. And I was scared. I was scared to death because I never had done a magazine without ads in it because I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. But I sold a lot of copies.
I'm sure you did. I mean, the pictures, I don't know if you can see it. The pictures of this thing are absolutely amazing. And just the how the community came along, that must have been part of your whole, when you were writing this and putting it together, people were waiting in lines to get into Piggly Wigglies. I mean, I think a magazine like that, I'll
tell you, if you had been there or anybody had been there, Bill, when we went through this, the staff and the team went through this at the time, when we pushed it out the door to our printers, Bill, seriously, dude, it was like all this minutia that had been hanging on us and all this anxiety of what we'd been through. It had been like we'd all been through a big therapeutic, round table and talked because we felt so much better because we had documented this huge storm. We knew people were going to love the magazine, and it kind of took a lift off of us,
It did. It's funny. Whenever it's like the COVID thing. When you have a big disaster or big event, it's good to be able to talk about it. But what you did with that and how that translates to other people, it's like therapy, really. You're talking about what you're going through. You're showing pictures. You're giving people, a record of what they went through. And I think that is therapeutic, honestly.
Very much so is therapy. Well, we felt like we had been through a therapy session, a Hugo therapy session for sure when we got done with it. Yep.
Yeah, that was just absolutely crazy. And I mean, was that your first magazine, or did because you were doing I remember you had the other magazines. Remember?
We had East Cooper Magazine, and now East Cooper Magazine's turned into Mount Pleasant Magazine. But as a result of Hugo Magazine, I chased Hurricane Andrew, Bill, and I was Fort Lauderdale. Miami Airport was already closed. Fort Lauderdale airport was already closed, and I was in the last plane flying into West Palm Beach Airport.
Didn't you do one of these books on Andrew?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I flew down there to Andrew, and you can always get great shots from events like this at either airports or marinas.
Right.
So I rented a plane, and I had a plane coming in the next day, and we went airport hopping, and I took a lot of photographs. It was a terrible disaster down there. But you know what's rewarding when you do it? We donated some money to some people that were from the sale of the Andrew magazine. But you know what's unique, Bill, is when you're there sitting in somebody's yard and you're talking to them about what they've been through, and their house is demolished behind them.
Oh, I know.
You can look them in the eye and you can say, I promise you it will get better. Because when you live through this, you know it will get better.
Sure, you absolutely have an empathy that
they don't understand.
You've driven down that road, and you're going to say, look, this is what you're going to do. I flew into Andrew in a Hurricane Hunter at night, and that was a Category 5 hurricane. And as you know, when you were down there in Homestead in South Florida, it just demolished South Florida. But again, kudos to you for doing those. When I went
into the Air Force base that's there in I don't think it's there in Homestead anymore. Anyway, when I went in there, I was using. It is still there.
I had a meeting there not long ago, but yeah.
So the Storm of the Century, I was using the Storm of the Century magazine from Hugo as my calling card, more or less.
Right.
And when I handed it to the communications director there, and he looked at it, and he looked at the name. This is, of course, Andrew just hit. He said, "I think you misnamed your magazine," because everybody always feels like the event they're in.
Right.
I just want to say thank you, Bill, for joining us here on Voice for Mount Pleasant.
My pleasure.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate. And I know our viewers and listeners really appreciate what you do at Channel 5, and I just appreciate your time.
We have a good team, Bill, as you do it over there at Mount Pleasant Magazine and the publications. And, it takes teamwork to do this. There's no I in team, and that's what we do here. We have a good team, and I'm going to keep this close.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you for publishing that back then and really continuing it. So it's great to see you, and we'll definitely be grabbing some lunch soon.
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks, Bill, very much.
You bet.
Thanks for spending your time with the Voice for Mount Pleasant podcast by Mount Pleasant Magazine. Your community, your podcast. Listen to past episodes at voice4mp.com.